Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Sales Scoop. This is a weekly live show for tech startup founders who want to improve how they sell. I'm Alistair Cole, your host for today. I'm a computer scientist and ex-software engineer with 2 decades experience in B2B sales and marketing. And I'm delighted that I'll be joined today by Dan Hammond, co-founder and Chief Product Officer at Squadify. Good afternoon, Dan. Hi.
Good afternoon, Alistair. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So as people who, this is a debut for us, first time we've had a live guest, so we're honoured that it's you, Dan. Thanks for joining. We aspire to bring the shiniest pearls of wisdom from experienced sellers, and that's why we've got you on. I know you have a wealth of experience selling professional services as a senior consultant and SaaS as well as in your role at Squadify. Perhaps for anybody who doesn't know you, you could give a quick introduction to yourself and Squadify and your role in the sales engine there. Thanks.
Sure. So I actually, my career started in sales and marketing roles in healthcare, actually, in medical devices. And then, as you say, I went into professional services, did a lot of leadership development in that role. And then we founded Squadify in order to democratize leadership development and teamwork. So sales has been with me all the way through that. In my first role, I was responsible for sales for computer services. And I sort of got my grounding, I think, in the sort of, I'm quite old, so late 80s, early 90s in sales. But that stayed with me throughout. Even when I was working with surgeons in medical devices, I was selling. When I went into professional services, same thing. So it's really stayed with me throughout. And now as the co-founder of Squadify, we're at that stage where we do a lot of founder selling. So out and about, talking to a lot of clients all the time, helping, really hoping to demonstrate the value of Squadify to them and their organizations.
Fantastic. And, talk to me a little bit about how your sales engine has changed as a result of Squadify and the platform and the services. I always get the impression that you must have the most efficiently functioning sales engine on the planet, because you're experts at collaboration and you've got the Squadify platform. How has your selling approach changed as a result of your founding Squadify and your expertise in that area?
So I think, what Squadify is all about, it's worth saying that Squadify is all about helping teams to build engagement and drive performance. And we do that through a SaaS platform where we gather data from the teams on their teamwork. So everyone has a say on their teamwork. And then we use AI and analytics to point them in the direction of one or two things they can do to improve that. And it's a really simple process. They're continually doing this sort of in an agile way, working on their teams. And this can work across whole organizations as well, so that they are building performance. So that's what we're doing. I think our sales process, interestingly, we're sort of we're alone in the category pretty much. We didn't realize this when we set out. I spotted this thing on LinkedIn recently, said we're not doing this because it's easy, it's because we thought it would be easy. And while that's not entirely true, starting a category is really hard. So there's a lot of sort of client prospect education that needs to be done. So there's no sort of, oh, you've got that, we do that but cheaper, or we do that but faster. There is no that. So whereas there are a lot of engagement tools and individual tools, there's not that much for teams. So I think our difference here is the sort of need for education and learning on the part of our that we have to impart to our potential clients along in the sales process. So that makes life a little bit interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And the way that you're going about selling, Squadify is a platform, but there's services that come along with it, so it's a relatively kind of, a complex sell. And so you're, which I think ties into the sales scoop that you want to share with us about how best to engage buyers at a particular point. Before we get a little bit too further, you and I discussed a couple of things that would be really interesting, but I think this tip that you'd hit on is fascinating and something I'm really keen to get into. Right. So, without further ado, please tell us what is that number one tip you want to share today, Dan? What is your sales scoop for today?
Sales scoop. So, first of all, you are right that this is a complex sell, in that we've got technology, we've got services, we're selling to enterprise, but also sometimes to individual senior teams. So there's a lot in that, and in fact, when you first spoke to me about this series, the thing that I'm going to talk about had happened, I think, the day before, and it just landed on it. Perfect. So the thing, sales, of course, is about delivering value. In my view, it's a consulting process to understand what your client needs. Sounds obvious, and then to match whatever you have to that need, without too much levering in, but to actually just really deeply understand what they need, and to solve pain points or accelerate something they want to do. The sales scoop is this: that to do that, you need to ask a lot of questions, but there's a trap. And that we fell into that trap in this example that I was talking about. And that is when the client gets on the call and says, great, tell me all about Squadify, or tell me all about company X. And there's a little bit of you that says, actually quite a big part of you, to be honest, that says, great, they're already interested. This is great. We're on this call to talk about Squadify. So fantastic. Why don't I they want me to do that. I'm client-centric. They've asked me to do it. Let's do it. Let's get in there. And this is a massive mistake. However much you think you're responding to the client's needs, it doesn't work. It's not going to end well. So there's a moment here of being, yes, client-centric, but also quite assertive about this, to be able to reverse that moment, to say, I'd love to do that. Somewhere along these lines, I'd love to do that, but so that I don't just, pitch at you or tell you generic stuff, could I understand a bit more about your role, your goals, the position you're in, the challenges you're having, whatever your question is, so that I can make sure that I'm really aligning what I say to your actual needs. So being quite transparent about that. So it's that sort of pivot, really, that you have to make in the call when that happens. However lovely this client is saying, yes, go on, tell me, actually owning that and not switching out to do pitch first, because it's going to go wrong.
Yeah, I've just gone on a bit of an emotional journey. You've taken me back into the room where, that's happened. And I'm thinking about, how many times maybe I've done that when I didn't need to, or I shouldn't have. And I'm guessing, it's quite jarring, because the way you were describing before, it's a natural to just answer the question. You're kind of in the flow, and it's quite jarring to stop. So
yes, it is.
How how early are we talking in your view? Is this we at what point in the meeting? Is this the first meeting? Is this every meeting? What point in the relationship? What point in the meeting would you
Well,
say?
that's a great point. I'm really referring mostly to that sort of crucial first meeting when you finally get FaceTime with someone, and there's that, and that there's that crucial conversation where you need to do those things, understand their needs, and then fit your offering and your value to it. So that
Yeah.
seems to be now obviously throughout the sales process, but every time you're almost doing a mini version of that because their needs will
Mm.
change. You're going to understand
Yeah.
more. You've got to be hearing it. But there is this, the one I'm really thinking about is that pivotal first meeting, and it's early doors in that call.
Yeah.
Niceties, conversations, hi, blah, 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 conversation, and then boom, in they come. They're really nice, and they know what the call's about. They know what, and interestingly, they expect you to they're sort of, yeah, as I say, they're being really kind to you. It's sort of, we're here for you to tell me about Squadify, so let's do that. And reversing that is the crucial thing, I think. And I think it works out better for everyone if you can make that
Yeah.
pivot.
Yeah, I guess, first impressions are so important, aren't they? Early on in the meeting, you setting your tone about, you talked about important in consultative selling, you're in the questions, you're gathering more information. It's how you kind of setting that tone from the start, right? That I've got two ears and one mouth, and I'm
Yeah.
all about you and your needs. So that makes sense. So that's really clear. First meeting, nice and early on.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you know,
Well, and
um,
also,
go
sorry to
on.
interrupt, but I think we run off a load of assumptions, don't we? We have these mental pictures, and so this is the only way to rid ourselves of those assumptions and not just go on that vanilla path, which can actually sort of hamper us throughout a long sales process if we don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, how do you have the discipline there? Talk me through, how do you do it? How do you catch yourself? How do you have the discipline to not blunder an answer?
Well, my unresolved trauma from that happening too many times, I think, is one that reminds me. I do. What I will do just mechanically is I will, and I tend to be honest with you, I tend to use paper, writing down. Don't use digital notes, but I write down, and I might just have a few key points I want to make about Squadify, but they're down the page, and I leave room for my notes above about what their things are. And I might even before the call just ask some specific questions I want to ask, so that my agenda on that paper is actually about questions first, with my
Yeah,
sort of bit at the end. And of course, that has to be very loose because I don't really know what's going to come up in that first part. But I sort of control myself in that. I also will, if I'm, I think the really good practice is to flag it, to help the client to know what's coming. So before the meeting, to actually set that out. Here's the goals of the meeting. I really want to understand your situation, your role, goals, any pain points you're having, and then I'll see if Squadify can fit with that, how that'll
yeah,
work. So you're putting an agenda out there before, so that also they can think. So you're not putting them on the spot, because
yes,
that's another slight danger. They think you're going to pitch to them, and then you flip it around, and okay, yeah, right. And that's not great for them. So giving them adequate warning up front, I
yeah,
think, is another great way to do it.
yeah. When as we talked ahead of the show, you dropped what I thought was an absolute truth bomb, which was that if you know speaking early means you have so little input from them in
Yeah,
terms of how you're able to tailor your response. So you're going cold with your vanilla stump. The more you listen, obviously, the more you can tailor that. And I think that you want to gather as much information as
absolutely.
possible. how much is the right amount? You know, and if you had a half of an hour's meeting, is it about have them talking for
Yeah.
50 minutes, or at what point do you draw the line there, and how do you know when you've got enough information down?
Yeah, good question. I think what I would mention is that when this has not been done in this order, we had a half-hour meeting and it went out to 45 minutes. The last half hour of that was unpicking, reversing into understanding the need, and then refitting the benefits and the value. It went well in the end, but we had to give it another 15 minutes just to do that. So look, I think it's hard to say. I think that is horses for courses. It might even be, look, this is a massive situation. Keep talking. I need to know more. Let's look very briefly in the last 30 seconds. I think Squadify could really help here. Could we set up another time, or why don't I put some notes together based on what you said? So it could even be that extreme, or they could have quite a simple answer, and you've your question or pain point, and they've dug in, and you've sort of got it, and you can get on with it quite quickly. But I wouldn't want to make that less than 10 minutes of a half-hour call, that's for sure, because it should be about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point you mentioned just now about unpicking, and I have a feeling that this is an area where if you get it wrong, it's so fundamental. If you get it wrong, like you've just said, you can spend not just the rest of the call, but potentially days and weeks sometimes, because the wrong message is heard by you and your team in the first part of the first call, and now it's anchored. And I think that's how critical it is. It's
Yes, I think that's right. And there's a massive difference between sort of sales and sort of vanilla marketing. So you're not just projecting your vanilla messages that you might put on your website if someone taps in your URL. Your message. I mean, no one has a product so simple that everyone can take the same thing out of it. You've got to project that angle of it that is going to be genuinely useful to the client. Your client's busy. They've got far better things to do than to sort of try to decode from your generic description of your product or service what's useful for them. They're too busy for that, quite rightly. So you have to do that job for them.
Yeah. And in terms of questions and guiding, that makes me feel that it's a consultative approach. It's quite a kind of coaching style approach. Is that something that you'd advocate across all of your sales meetings, all of your sales practice, or is that more appropriate early on in this first meeting?
I'm just trying to think about the later ones. Yeah, look, I think that should never leave you. Things change so rapidly that I don't think we can say, great, I've got the situation now. Now we can go in with implementation, or I can just. I think the ears to mouth ratio has to remain the same. There might be calls down the line where it's more one way. But even if you get into implementation, for example, that might be sort of, right, I'm running this meeting. This is how we're going to do it. Throughout that, there are going to be signs that is or not is not going to fit the client's schedule, the structure, their cost base, their resources, whatever. So even when you've got a pretty clear thing that you think you're presenting, there's got to be some awareness of what's happening there.
Yeah. Okay. And when have you been pushed in the past where somebody refuses, a potential buyer is maybe being a bit prickly or refuses to share their point of view, and that they want to hear from you? Has that happened to you before?
It has, actually. It has. I would say though that's very unusual, and I would say that really it's because there's something deeper is the problem there. That the time it's happened is when I've been, the thing where a senior person says, "Oh, speak to someone that reports them, speak to Squadify or whoever," and they'll, that's when and then they're an unwilling participant, basically. So I think if that happens, there's a warning sign there. If they're not willing to explore with you what their current role is, what their challenges are, there's either a trust issue you need to solve, a confidentiality issue, even an NDA, or they might even be there sort of under duress. I've seen that a couple of times. So, but I think it happens. I think it's worth questioning, not going on with the sales pitch. I think that's probably that's not helpful again, but really sort of understand, okay, just to try to go deeper and really understand what's happening for them in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's when things aren't going swimmingly, but that happens occasionally. And, I don't know if you've got any tips for, we have a lot of our audiences, kind of tech startup founders, they don't have that kind of broad experience that do you. Any tips for handling difficult characters in that situation? I think you're great advice to say stop the sales pitch, but then what would you do out the back of that? How do you get it back on track?
I mean, I think that it's hard to generalize, I think, but I think it's worth, the other thing you could do, of course, is to meet their needs, give a little description of what you do, and then quickly get back into how does that sound for you, and you're almost backing into that first part, if you like, but not doing a massive pitch, but just okay, let me just give you a quick overview of who we are and what we are, so that you got an introduction, and then back into does that sound? How does that sound? What's your first reaction to that? That's a way, I think, and I've seen that work. You've still got 20 minutes of the meeting left, and you're back into questions, but with a bit of context. So there's no point forcing anything. But I think the alarm bells for me would be, other than that, but depending on the context, you could you might want to just look at the broader context of how that meeting was set up and where that person is. As you say, it's not always rosy, but it's just worth thinking about. But I think that might be something I would do, is this is what we basically do, and get back. What's your reaction to that? Does that sound useful to you? Because you're then into a line of questioning potentially.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And given we're talking about letting the buyer speak, getting more context, more information to tailor our response, I know you're passionate about uncovering the need, right? Which is first and foremost, it's the thing that we ask. Tell our clients to go after. I know that's a big deal for you, and that's really what this is. How important has understanding need been for Squadify as you've been growing your business and selling your platform?
Hugely important, because we can solve a lot of problems, but we can easily, if we talk about solving one problem and they don't have that, or we've understood in a slightly subtly wrong way, then we're going to miss, and they're going to miss the opportunity of solving that problem. And I think the other thing in terms of uncovering the need that I've seen that's really important, and I've fallen into this trap as a founder, is you start hearing about, we're already talking about teamwork and maybe dysfunction or challenges or the need to accelerate or need to close an engagement gap. As soon as then they say, yeah, I've got this problem in my team, it's X. There is then a danger that you do almost a mini version of this sales scoop, which is, oh, great, they said they've got a problem. I can solve that. Let me now pitch my solution to you based on that, which is better than doing it at the top of the call. But you're also making an error there potentially. And I've done this, where you're not really sitting on that need for long enough. So let's unpack that. Let me really understand that for a start, so that I genuinely understand what you're talking about. Because words can be misleading. You can say, I've got a dysfunctional team. Well, what does that mean? Or our innovation isn't rapid enough. We're not experimenting. Or what do these things mean? Or people are demotivated. Whatever it is, dig into it to understand it. But also help the client to see the impact of that. So before moving on, it's part of that spin selling idea, but let's really explore the impact of that need on you and the team and the organization. So drilling into that is a really powerful thing, because actually it's, again, consulting skills. Yeah. This is possibly something they haven't thought of really doing. It's something you could really help with. So you've got a problem with execution, let's say. How slow is your time to market versus your customers? Well, it's about 10%. Okay, so and what's your turnover again? Well, is 100 billion, 100 million. Okay, that's a $10 million problem, isn't it? You got here. Yeah, I guess it is. So then you're really drilling down and making sure that problem, both in terms of detail but impact, are there, and then you might be ready to finally go ahead and talk about your solution. So I think that's another trap, to a mini scooplet, a scooplet really, that people can fall in, a trap you can easily fall into.
I find myself there all the time as a kind of, computer scientist and engineer. I like making stuff and innovate. I like moving fast. And
Yes.
my co-founder Kieran, who you know well, he's Mr. Ice. He can wait all day. He can wait, but I'm a bit too much of an eager beaver. I'm trying to push it, and I've had to really learn from Kieran over the last few years to try to slow down, keep gathering information. So that rings
interesting.
very true for me.
It can be. I think when we are problem solvers, it can just be like a bit whack a frog. You see something and you hit it. And yeah, the creating that space and even some silence into which more insights will come is hard to do. It's hard, but again, for you, Alistair, I guess that's a sort of the other side of a really good part of your nature and your ability and your professional value. But they're the things we need to watch out for, I guess.
Exactly, and you talked about a little cheat sheet ahead of the call. Sometimes I like to write down. I get a big red pen and write no, and I write the things that I'm not going to do as well. And I feel like that's going to be triggered psychologically. But I find that kind of preparation, right, and
yes,
especially from a human point of view, I think when you get right at the beginning of the meeting and you're seeing new faces for the first time, stuff's happening to you psychologically, and you want to contribute, demonstrate your expertise, demonstrate your value. You want to kind of go first. Your lizard brain is saying, put it all out there, show them how great you are.
Yes.
And it's hard not to.
I think there is. And I think, we sometimes talk in our leadership work about be, do, have. If you want to have an outcome, you have to do certain things, but actually all of that will be driven by the be. So there is a little bit of preparation as well. The do is quite good because that checklist and your no, don't do these things. But the be is really important. So choosing your be before the call. So how am I going to be in this? You might want to say you're going to be confident, but curious is just a brilliant one. Empathetic, just sort of really say, right, these are the 3 words I'm going to write down, and I'm going to actually internalize those. So I'm going into this, and I think that's really important in sales. I still hear in tech people confusing sales with pitching. I still hear pitching, and actually, if you go in not thinking, I've got to be really succinct about my product, I've got to pitch it in a certain way. No, what you've got to be is curious and really delving in, and you hold that space. So I think the mindset side is valuable in your preparation.
Yeah, totally. Well, look, that's a fantastic sales scoop for us to kick off with. Not getting sucked in, letting the buyer, encouraging the buyer to do the talking. It's all about consultative selling. It's about being in the questions. It's about listening. So that's a really great one to kick off. Thank you for that. In terms of, we've got a few minutes before we wrap up. I just want to ask you a kind of Squadify question and understand. It's early November. People are thinking about the end of the year. They're thinking about closing the year off in a more positive way and wrapping up things well. What do you what tips would you give to anybody listening or watching startup founders about their team, about kind of what they might be able to do to foster better team collaboration? You're the king of collaboration in my eyes, Dan. What could startup founders be doing to improve that towards the end of the year?
Thank you. No, look, I think startups things change so fast for startups, and of course the research shows, and our practice shows, our data shows that if you want performance and connection in your team, it's clarity first. So really building, even before you build psychological safety and all the trust and all those good things, clarity first. So really just make sure everyone is clear on why the team exists, what the goal is, and that everyone knows how they're going to work together to actually achieve that goal. So it's worth always refreshing that. It's a constant work of a founder to do that. And I think in this fast moving times, we often abandon clarity because it's crazy.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to double down on clarity, just make it more granular, and every month make sure you know exactly what you're doing, and your team will really appreciate it. Then they've got a reason to connect and trust each other.
Yeah. That absolutely rings true with us and our business too. When we're measuring people with our 360 sales diagnostic, as
Yeah,
the first thing we check on is the clarity, and no surprise, when clarity in the sales process increases, then confidence increases, win rates increase, they close more business, they're happier and less stressed. But it all starts with clarity. So we're on the same page.
that's good to hear.
Dan, thank you so much. It's been really great. How could anybody get in touch with you if they wanted to continue the discussion?
Well, thanks for having me, Alistair. First of all, it's been great. Thanks to everyone for listening. LinkedIn, Dan Hammond, Squadify, or that's probably the best way. Just connect with me,
Okay.
and I'd be delighted to have a chat with you.
Well, great. We'll add the links to Dan and Squadify in the recording after this. That's kind of us live for today. 2 weeks next week, we're now a weekly live show. A week today, Kieran and I are going to be delivering a show on enterprise. Basically, when is the right time to go for enterprise? It's not always exactly the right time. How do you judge when it is, and how do you make those next few moves? And then 2 weeks today, we're going to have our second guest on, Winnie Akajo, who's a founder at the LVS Hub. Winnie's coming on to talk to us about her sales scoop, and she'll be trying to follow Dan in your footsteps. So thank you for being our inaugural guest on the show. Absolutely delighted to have you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Alistair.
Take care. Have a great day, Dan. Bye, everybody.